As organizations seek to embrace immersive technologies that include both virtual and augmented reality, could remote access integration be the key to unlocking the next era of productivity? Welcome to this sixth episode of RealVNC's Remote Access Redefined podcast series. And in today's episode, the future state of work through the lens of remote access integration is our topic. We're going to be discussing how innovations in remote access and immersive experience technologies are shaping the way we work, collaborate, and solve problems. I'm your host, Nick Cavalancia from Conversational Geek, and joining me today are two speakers. The first one is Dom Parks, as always, RealVNC's head developer, for OEM. Dom, once again, glad to have you on a podcast.
Yeah, great to be here, Nick. Thanks.
We're also joined by Alex Hessler. He's CEO of Invisible Thread. Alex, thank you for joining me as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Glad you're both here. Now, Dom, just for any new listeners, in case they haven't listened to the previous five that we've done so far, could you give us a real quick intro about the work that you do at RealVNC and your role in helping companies with their remote access integration needs?
I look after the SDK and OEM side of what we do here at RealVNC. So that's kind of looking after the technical side of integrations. So I'm always working closely with customers to get our technology into their products and use cases and devices.
Excellent. And then Alex, just to let the audience get a little bit to know about you, could you share a little bit about the work that you do at Invisible Thread and what Invisible Thread does?
Sure. Invisible Thread's an immersive media studio. So we primarily work in the fields of augmented reality, virtual reality, real-time projection mapping, installations at conferences, and we do work for all kinds of different clients, from large tech companies to small nonprofits, and really about bringing modern storytelling to these new sorts of technologies.
Excellent. I really appreciate that you're here. I think you're going to add a lot of value and context to the conversation we're having today. Today's because we're looking at the future state of work and then the role that remote access integration plays with it. Maybe what I want to start is kind of high level for both of you. And maybe Dom, I'll start with you. Alex, I'd like you to answer the same question I'm about to ask Dom. But just if you had to describe what the future of work looks like, and the part that remote access integration plays in just a couple of phrases, just very high level, 50,000 foot view kind of thing. What would that look like? Dom, let me start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nick. So we used to have a phrase, we still do at RealVNC, that I think really fits here, which is work wherever works. And I think probably for this, you can expand it to be kind of like work however works. So it might be that you're, particularly in terms of remote access integration and remote access in general, you're bringing desktops and kind of existing user interfaces and points of interaction into whatever workspace you want them to be in.
Alex, what would you add to that? What would you define it?
I mean, for us, the really big shift happened when COVID came in, and our industries had to adapt to, how do you get things done as normal when you're all at home? And that brought in a lot of different workflows for people to be able to work natively at home as though they're in the office. So that's kind of everything from kind of remote access, like using kind of VNC solutions, through to cloud computing and other sorts of resources. And so I see that just becoming the new normal, where all the infrastructure has now moved to those sorts of systems, whether you're in the office or not.
Excellent. I appreciate you both kind of helping us level set and establish sort of some context for the discussion today. Dom, you mentioned workstations briefly, and I want to touch on that. There's sort of an evolution of workstations. Typically, people think of remote access as just simply remote control or, remote viewing or something on those lines. What role do you see remote access integration playing in the evolution of workstations as we move towards sort of a more distributed, more immersive environment to let people work not only wherever they are, but however they want?
Yeah. When I think of workstations, my immediate thought is like of the old days of when I was at university, and this was, I'm not that old, but it was the end of kind of mainframe, where you had a mainframe and terminals, workstations that you worked at, and they were very lightweight. They were, not very powerful devices. And kind of VNC has always been part of the more modern version of that, really. So we have a lot of use cases where people are using VNC to manage access to applications that are on a huge server install somewhere, and they're managing access to virtual displays where users can use CAD applications or whatever for design use cases. So I think we're kind of already on that path there. And obviously everything, as Alex said, everything's gone cloud distributed over the last few decades. So yeah, we're kind of almost moving back to the point where the devices themselves don't matter as much. They are still quite powerful compared to how they used to be. But yeah, definitely, I think all the services, tools, entertainment has moved to that distributed model, and I think the workstations and devices will start to go that way too, or if they haven't already.
And on that note of devices, though, I know, Alex, you've been working on a very interesting project with Lawrence Berkeley Labs, which I've actually been to. I used to live in Oakland many years ago,
yeah.
so I know that pretty well. Did tours of it as a kid. But anyways, I digress. And I know that using Apple Vision Pros to create sort of a virtual control room for a particle accelerator, and that right there, that sort of changes everything that we're talking about, because I think typically when people think about, again, remote access, they're just thinking about like one PC remotely controlling another PC. But this is a vastly different kind of scenario here. How does remote access integration enable this, and how is it changing the way that the scientists are working?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the issues, just kind of in a general way, and then this has been in my industry, is that when you're at work, you have really specialized equipment, large monitors, Wacom tablets, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you go home, you're on a little laptop. How do you duplicate that environment? And that's been one of the biggest challenges for people as they've moved into kind of remote access situations. Lawrence Berkeley Lab has a really interesting scenario. Like you mentioned, they have this particle accelerator. It's called the Advanced Light Source, or ALS. And they have a control room that's pretty similar to what you might see kind of like a mission control for NASA. It's like a room full of computers, and an engineer or physicist needs to, when they're at home, check on things, log in, make sure things are running smoothly. And right now they have a laptop and a script they run on their laptop, and they bring up each display manually. So they maybe have to log into 6 different computers, and you can imagine they have one screen up, and then they toggle to the next screen and the next screen, and they're on a Zoom call at the same time, and they're trying to sort of juggle this. I was brought in to think about how we could essentially recreate the control room as multiple displays, but anywhere you want. And that's one thing, actually, I have it right here. For those that haven't seen the Apple Vision Pro, it's just a VR headset. But what it enables you to do is have multiple displays kind of floating around you. So you can, with one button, launch connections to, say, 6 machines, and they all pop up at once, and have your video chat running at the same time, so you can collaborate with other people remotely. And that's been a really big win. We've prototyped an initial version, and it's been a big success.
Yeah, I went on a tangent in my head there as you're talking about being on a Zoom call with an Apple Vision Pro, and I'm thinking, like, what do people see then? Like, you like Tony Stark, when he's inside Iron Man?
Yeah, it is really funny. They see a little like hologram version of you, and there's a native built-in. We just started prototyping this week. There's a built-in kind of hologram through FaceTime, but that's just Apple's version of Zoom in this case, and you can have your coworker sitting next to you like a 3-dimensional model of them, and you can point and they can see you point, and you can point at the same thing. It's really interesting to have somebody sort of literally looking at your monitor and you talking about what's on the screen that way.
That is fascinating. Now, Dom, as we're obviously thinking about this sort of future of a workstation, how do you guys see remote access tools adapting to support hybrid setups that use both maybe traditional hardware, because you heard Alex mention things like logging into 6 different machines and things like that, with keyboard and mice and that sort of thing, with these more immersive technologies with augmented and virtual reality?
Yeah. I think the first thing, keyboards and mice and things, we're going to struggle to kind of leave them behind, but maybe we'll figure out a way to do that. But we're already seeing kind of 2 use cases for augmented reality and VR with remote access. One is the one that Alex mentions. It's kind of the more generic version of that is the office use case, where you're bringing a laptop screen and potentially the keyboard as well. I think some of these devices have got a kind of a window where they can look at the keyboard through your camera and just bring that part of it in. And you're in a collaborative space, and just like Alex says, you can sit next to a colleague. In one of our customers' implementations, they can lean over and type on their colleague's laptop, which is kind of awesome. So I think that's a really clear use case. The other one that we've seen for a long time that I think is probably only going to grow is there's an AR headset that is with a technician somewhere on site, somewhere dangerous potentially, or somewhere restricted maybe, but it could be anything. And someone can remote into that and see what that technician's seeing, maybe annotate on the screen that they're looking at. So they could select this 3D object and say, you need to turn this way or adjust that pipe or whatever. So kind of co-browsing, but to the extreme. And they really are, getting involved in their day-to-day troubleshooting of whatever the issue is. But it'd be great to overcome some of the issues involved with working from anywhere, public transport, out and about, like just the ergonomics of mouse pointers and keyboards and things. How do we replace that with something virtual, something maybe that has haptics, or like Google Glass used to have a blink control that you could take a photo by blinking or something like that. I'm sure these things will become more widespread, and maybe even brain control.
Oh, that's hopefully in the works. We'll see. But it's interesting. Both of you have touched on, I'm going to call it a workflow, things that have to be done. So Alex mentioned the example of I mentioned this earlier, I kind of clued in on it, of like someone having to log into 6 different machines, and that's just part of the process. And then Dom, you mentioned maybe someone's fixing pipes, I think you said, and there's a process for how that has to happen. And so the idea of layering immersive tools on top of existing workflows, Alex, I'm wondering, do you think that's going to be sort of kind of essential to the future of the workspace, if you will? You can define workspace however you want. And maybe a secondary question to tack onto that is, how can remote access integration help organizations, help users merge what I'll kind of call traditional workflows? So like the logging onto 6 machines and this sort of immersive workflow, which I'm going to kind of pick on Dom's example of someone virtually going, take this thing and turn it that way. And now this one over here. And you're using, some augmented reality and 3D modeling or whatever to accomplish that. Is layering going to be the future? And if so, or maybe even if not, how can companies that want to, how can they merge traditional and immersive workflows together?
No, I think that's a good point. When I started in the industry, almost everyone was like really excited about these technologies. 2015 was when a lot of the modern headsets started emerging into the market, and people were jumping really far down the road. Oh my God, everything's going to change. And what we learned over the last 10 years is that it has to serve people's needs. It can't just be like the future for the future's sake. And what we've discovered is that people don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel. Existing interfaces, 2D panels that you click on with a mouse and you type in fields with a keyboard are here for a while. And having that being a native part of the integration with, these immersive technologies or whatever you're doing for remote access is I think, a requirement. As people get more and more comfortable using these sorts of things where there's things up in space around them that you can reach out and touch, other sorts of interfaces and conventions will come in. But there hasn't really been a replacement for a tactile keyboard for just typing in information. I think using your voice will start to become more common, but even then, we've all used those sorts of interfaces and they glitch out. And if you're trying to do something technical, it's like, how do you just want to get in there with a keyboard? So I think that's here to stay. There are quite a few examples, like Dom gave about the different industries using these sort of remote collaboration, like engineers fixing equipment in the fields. I have some friends that have prototyped and demoed those sorts of use cases. The Microsoft HoloLens had a big rollout where they were demonstrating that kind of thing. And I think it is like a really, really impactful workflow. And I think it will become a standard way of working in the future. It's not quite here today. It's sort of like experimental still, but as the technology advances, it'll become more and more ubiquitous.
I saw a video of a product. I think it was more like a promotional, future kind of thing that's going to come out at some point. I don't think there's actually a product that does this yet. Maybe it does. You'd probably maybe even know. But it was somebody sitting on a plane, and they had a keyboard, like this big kind of a thing, and maybe there's a mouse pad with it or whatever. And all they had was like, the equivalent of like a pair of the Apple Vision goggles. And that's what they used on the plane. They didn't have a screen. They literally just typing on their keyboard, moving their mouse, and everything was in front of them. And while that has nothing to do with remote access integration, it does speak to this idea of maybe what we're going to be remotely accessing is vastly different, because that felt like that's a very different workstation than we'd have today, because there is no 2D screen. I mean, does this exist already or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think that example is actually one that I know people use now instead of a laptop, and it's goes to ergonomics. Like, what is more comfortable to use? If we've all been in coach where you're on a laptop and like your keyboard's here and the monitor's like, and someone leans back to watch a movie.
And
If
crunch,
you can just if you can just put the headset on and your monitor's at a comfortable distance and it's big, it looks like a 30-inch 4K monitor, and you can just type and click. That's more comfortable. And so I've known a lot of people. I have a friend who's he has a hard time sitting up all day, so he actually can lie down in his bed and like look up at the ceiling and work that way. So instead of having a really elaborate workstation that can like on hydraulics that moves all your equipment around, you just have a headset. And I think that will start to become more common especially as the goggles and the headsets become more kind of comfortable to wear.
And maybe cost effective.
Yeah.
And everyone's moved from, desktop PCs, quite large things with keyboards and huge monitors, and they've moved to laptops. And people at the same time have moved from laptops to tablets, and tablets to phones. So I think there's going to be a convergence where you could just have a phone and a headset and do almost everything from that combo.
It's interesting you say that, because that actually could exist today, particularly in I know in like the Android world. Some of those handheld devices are plenty powerful to just, they can even today connect to a traditional monitor if necessary, and so on. This actually brings up sort of the next question I had for both of you. And we're already kind of in the middle of this, so you don't have to feel like I'm asking you a brand new question, but just more contextualizing the conversation right now is, what do you think is the ideal workstation of the future? What's that going to look like? And how does remote access integration and immersive technologies improve the productivity, the collaboration? You can see we're already kind of talking about this a little bit on, but just not even fine-tuned what the topic is. But what do you think it's going to look like? Maybe we just stop there. And maybe Alex, could I start with you?
Sure. I think the function of a workstation is to get things done, right? And so the answer to that question is really like, what is the best way to get something done? How do you get from the problem you're trying to solve to the solution as quickly and intuitively as possible? And that's where all of this equipment's like, if you can see what I see, I have equipment like 180 degrees, because depending on what problem I'm solving, I need the thing at hand. So I think that will always be kind of the keystone of a good workstation. And so then how do you make that easier to get at? And one of the things that's really come into play around remote access is this idea of having resources on the cloud devices, or being able to tap into other infrastructure that you don't have physically in your local workstation. And that's been a huge upgrade in the sense of like, I need to run a render on a massive render farm, or I need to launch an AI that does a thing. And I can just kick off lots and lots of different tasks that are running on remotely all over the place. And I think that's the future, is really just this kind of web of resources that you can like control from your local workstation.
Dom, what's your thought?
Yeah, I think 100% agreed. I think going back to it work wherever works, or work however works sort of thing, it just needs to fit in with how people want to work and how they need to work seamlessly as possible. And it needs, whatever we do with a workstation in the future, if there is one, there probably isn't. It's probably like an explosion of different ways of working, I'd have thought. But it needs to complement what we have now or replace it. Kind of in novel ways, things like getting rid of the laptop entirely, like Alex said. We could have just have VMs, just have machines that spin up when you need them. You bring them into your environment that's pretty dumb otherwise, and but also incredibly powerful because it's an Apple Vision Pro or whatever, but it's not doing the heavy work. And yeah, you're just creating a virtual or augmented world like that potentially.
I think we've kind of talked a little bit about this, the sort of the adoption of AR and VR technologies, and we've touched on needing certain kinds of devices, need a use case, that sort of thing. But I did want to ask and see, maybe Alex, do you think that remote access integration could actually address maybe some of the barriers? Could it make AR, VR technologies more useful for organizations? Because now there's a use case for it through remote access. I'm thinking back to Dom's example of the I don't know why we were fixing a pipe with VR. That'd be like a really high tech plumber, but I'm going to go with it because I think it's kind of funny. So, I mean, would it make more plumbers, use AR and VR if they knew that? I know that's a silly example, but you get my question. Would remote access make AR and VR adoption come more quickly?
I think it's a good bridge from sort of existing technologies into sort of the immersive space. There's a couple issues with the current generation of VR. One is just that the headsets are sort of uncomfortable and people don't want to wear them all day. And the display resolution is not quite high enough. There's a bunch of kind of physical issues with the devices that will get solved over time. And then the second is software integration, having all the tools you're used to using every day on whatever computer you use all day just available without having to do any technical installation or problem solving to get them to run. And that's a tricky problem because all of the current generation of virtual reality and augmented reality devices are really being thought of as like this kind of new medium, which then doesn't really invite old things into it. So I do think remote access is the secret to that, is like allowing all of your traditional workflows to be able to natively just pop up in whatever way they need to, is going to be a bridge to eventually these workflows will be running native on device or in some other way. But this kind of way of logging into old technology with new technology is going to definitely be here for a while.
That's a really interesting perspective, and it just proves that there's nothing new under the sun, if you will. And what I mean by that is, like, years ago, Microsoft, I want to say they released like Windows 7 or something. Maybe it might have been Windows 8. And there was like a lack of support for older versions of Windows and older applications. And so they bought a company that did basically virtual desktops, and they installed that on, and you could run a virtual instance of like your Windows 95 on Windows 7 or something along those lines. I'm going to get it wrong. Somebody listening to this podcast knows exactly what I'm talking about. And if this was a live webcast, they would stick it into instead of a podcast, they would stick it into the Q&A going, that was such and such the name of the technology. But it's just really need that bridge. You need a technology that's a bridge that says, let me get the old stuff and pull it onto the new platform. Yeah. And we're really talking about the same thing. It's totally different technology, of course, but
same problem. But yeah,
same problem here. And I think, Dom, that leads into my next question for you, which is from this sort of technical perspective, from your standpoint. What are the biggest hurdles that are going to exist in trying to integrate remote access with immersive technology? So let's say accomplish the bridge that we're talking about as an example. Yeah. And then how do things like latency, security, better user experience, how do those things get addressed as well?
Yeah. Good question. So I think starting with the last part there, I think security, it should just be the baseline, the default. And that's my bugbear. It's like it should be just secure by default, easy to use. I think the hurdle here is, how do you do that as a UX? Are you typing a password like in the old world, or are we doing something better for VR and AR? Are we doing more modern security mechanisms? And I think you've got to think about those when you're integrating something like this into it. You've got to keep it secure, but you've got to keep it easy and straightforward. Latency and kind of perceived latency are major issues with interactivity. I mean, it depends how you arrange it in your VR. Say we're going for the collaborative workspace. It depends how you arrange it. If it's a screen on a laptop and there's a lot of latency, if you're using it as if you were using a real laptop, it's going to be a painful experience. So you need to have a protocol, or at least a connectivity mechanism that can deal with high latency. It can deal with streaming well. But I think also for desktop use cases and for anything like visual, like CAD, or probably a lot of engineering and design type use cases, you're going to want really good acuity as well, like really one-to-one representation of the pixels, potentially, not a load of H.264 artifacting or something like that. So you want to look for those things. You want to make sure that you have an implementation that can deal with those things and maybe adapt to that sort of thing. None of those things are particularly difficult to accomplish, though. But yeah, performance is going to be an issue, and making sure you've got that performance there. And you can do some things with perceived latency as well to improve it. So you can have like a cursor that runs on the viewer side, on the headset side, that the other side tracks later, and that's really effective at making it feel responsive and feel usable. So I think that would probably adapt to the VR use case as well. But,
so you've got some smoke and mirrors just in case if you need to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like game code issue. I can kind of share a story. I came from the visual effects industry, and that industry was heavily local to each facility because it's very specialized computers, hardware, and when everyone moved remote, that was one of the most challenging issues. Was just this tiny sub-second latency threw everyone off, because when you're doing something all day every day, it becomes kind of like a paintbrush. You're just kind of like, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. And when you do that and nothing happens, and then it happens, your brain just like can't work. And everyone just kind of had the most frustrating days. And so almost all the system integrators that were working at that time, that was 100% their number one issue, was just like, how do you get someone, when they click and drag, that it happens the same way it would if it was local? And that was like one of the big problems to solve.
Another topic I want to talk about was maybe a use case around the idea of training. The obvious use case one of the obvious use cases for remote access, one is like tech support or something along those lines. But the other one is remotely trying to see what's going on in somebody else's world and then assisting them. We can go back to Dom's pipe example, but I'm thinking about industries like healthcare, manufacturing, that kind of thing. And Alex, I mean, I think you'll agree this is a key use case for virtual reality and augmented reality. Can you maybe share some examples that you've seen where remote access integration is enhancing immersive simulation in those kinds of industries?
Yeah, I mean, the virtual reality training is the use case for VR outside of gaming. It's the kind of the number one, and it's sort of, no one really saw that coming, but it's the one that is continued to be valuable for enterprise over and over again. It saves you money over bringing trainers in or bringing people to trainers. It prevents you from having to bring people to hazardous environments. And it's not quite a remote access story, but there is one that really struck me. I was at a conference, and that one of the creators of kind of VR training was giving a speech about how at McDonald's they were having trouble with training up new people because their sort of attention spans for like kind of a way of learning has moved beyond just getting a pamphlet and reading it. And they couldn't get sort of young people to learn how to use the equipment. So they created a virtual reality essentially game that was like, how do you maximize the kitchen? And they awarded points for making certain foods. And then they sort of gamified the training. And that's becoming a more and more common requirement for getting new sorts of employees spun up, is kind of getting them trained up in a really, really quick way that's entertaining, and getting them used to these systems that they're going to be integrating with in real life.
That's interesting. Any kind of services business, you could do the same thing. You could gamify, I don't know, working at a dry cleaner and learning how to do dry cleaning, or waiting tables, or that's interesting. Gamification.
Yeah, that's
maybe one of the paths.
New way of keeping people focused.
Too much ADHD out there. Yeah. Who knows? So then the other question I have, and then I want to talk a little bit about the future state of work a little bit more with you both, is Dom, as there are more industries that are adopting immersive workflows, ways of operating and so on, how can remote access tools ensure that it's secure, efficient collaboration? Thinking about back to the idea of, like, let's say healthcare, obviously there's HIPAA over here in the States that we have to worry about and things like that. So the data has to be, even though HIPAA was never written to be thinking about some doctor in one location helping a doctor in another location with a patient in surgery, but it applies. And how do we make sure that we ensure both security and efficiency? We've touched on this before, but how do you think we can help here?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to a lot of things that we've touched upon. Things like collaboration, bringing people into the same workspace, and you have to, if we're going for secure and efficient, I think make sure your remote access solution is secure and efficient. But yeah, in particular, you can. I mean, I think it's kind of going into this realm of what use cases can you imagine for remote access within a virtual environment or an immersive workflow that are going to be potentially contravening some of these security checkpoints. Things like, there's a reason why no one else is in this particular room in the medical center or whatever, and you need to make sure that your solution that is breaking through that is compliant with whatever regs are there. So that's HIPAA in that case. I think it's kind of similar to any other remote access use case in that case, because you want to make sure that whatever you're bringing into any client, any viewer, any technician side is just is compliant with those regs and secure.
And I have a couple of questions here that I'm going to compress slightly, because I think I have too many questions, I think, for you guys today, for the time we're trying to do for today's recording. And I was thinking about this, Alex, just quickly about how you see remote access integration and the immersive technologies helping with, specifically, I'm thinking about distributed workforces and real-time collaboration. Because that's something we really haven't touched on. I think just to paint a picture for the audience that we could be doing that just to try and satisfy those two needs within an organization. Do you have some examples here? I know you've worked with Meta, Intel, Disney, and a bunch of other companies. So how does the future of work look like it's going to change from just the standpoint of like distributed workforce and real-time collaboration?
I think for anyone that's moved to a remote job, there are perks, which is you get to stay in your house and spend more time with your family. I think the drawbacks are that kind of intuitive connection you build with your coworkers, and that's so sort of an intangible set of things that happen when you're physically in a place with people that add up over time, where you have a better morale and better connections. Sometimes more things get done. I have lots of stories where my teams, when we've worked together, could get a lot more done in the day just through kind of someone having a question or thinking out loud, someone else peppering in, and all of a sudden they're looking at each other's monitors. So that is the next kind of wave, is like, how do you have those sorts of spontaneous connections happening with coworkers while you're working remote? And there's been a number of experiments. I don't know if any of them have been a kind of 100% successful, but we used to run our weekly all hands meetings in VR, where everyone would log in and you had an avatar and you're at a big conference room and you could look over at people. And this was a sort of a business app that Meta had launched. And we could have our presentation screen in the front and someone could run that. And it had all of the kind of trappings of a conference room and the kind of the ability to kind of whisper to the person next to you and the other people couldn't hear, which was like, when you've been working in a Zoom call for years, the idea that I could be like, hey, and no one else could know other than the people next to me was like, oh, this is great. I can, and it's like that kind of stuff I think is really important to bring in. So I'm hoping that as the technology evolves, that we can essentially feel more like humans. That's really what I hope, is that we're less and less these kind of boxes of just productivity and more like people that can connect to each other.
All right, let's shift to maybe something that's a little more future thinking. We've talked about very practical, immediate, realistic scenarios. We went out a couple of years in concept of maybe what's possible. And so maybe we can do this last part of the conversation today, is to venture out to some, I'll call it the sci-fi future of work, for the lack of a better term. Just, what's maybe not entirely implausible, as opposed to what is plausible. And so Dom, I'll give you kind of a scenario, and you tell me what you think maybe could be used here. Maybe a world where AI systems are fully autonomous, and maybe using remote access as, let's say, a fail-safe, or a kill switch, or something like that for systems that go rogue. We want to avoid Skynet as much as possible. I mean, is something like that, something that's not entirely implausible?
Yeah, I mean, it seems. So if we could talk about the generic world of remote access, and I think probably stuff like screen sharing is going to, any tool that does that is going to gradually move into just generic remote access. So remote access first rather than screen sharing first, if you see what I mean. But yeah, generic remote access could be used as a kill switch, no problem. I doubt it would need to actually remote like a desktop within the AI device. It could. I mean, yeah, AI at the moment is running on computers. You could remote into the desktop of the console of that computer and switch it off. But the best bet might actually be controlling things that are much more much more low level, like remoting into the power and network access. If you really want to make sure it's not going to continue to be rogue or continue to affect other things, you cut the power and the network. But I reckon that if you get a fully autonomous general purpose AI and you want to turn it off, it's going to be pretty difficult, because we've already got systems now that, unless it's got a really strict remit to what it's allowed to do and a real strict specific purpose that we've managed to instill in it, and it hasn't got its own agenda, which is quite difficult to prove. I think it's going to be difficult to shut them down with anything, because they can potentially learn to replicate themselves and hack other systems. I think
by definition they're distributed, right? So like
exactly.
There isn't a machine that they're running on. So
I think they've already shown that some of these, even the basic LLMs, are quite good at helping hackers just literally hack systems, and also obviously helping hackers in building things like phishing attacks, but and protecting themselves too. So in theory, you could do this. Maybe the remote access to a desktop or to the kind of whole array of remote access tools at your disposal would help here, actually, because you could have more ways of trying to shut down these things.
And all else fails, you could just get a big bucket of water.
Yeah.
That's all we need at the end. In case of overthrowing by AI systems, please throw water, because they can't stop that unless they can lock buildings down or something. But we're way off topic. It doesn't matter. Alex, how you talked about at Meta having the meetings and people had virtual avatars and things like that. How about maybe sci-fi level thinking about creating entirely virtual work environments? So now we're remote controlling, into a desktop that's at work, perhaps, or it's certainly in the cloud, but it's controlled by the company. But is that even, again, not entirely implausible to create entirely virtual work environments so people, even though they're remote, they are at work?
Yeah, I don't think that's very far off. I think we're 1 or 2 generations away from a headset that people will be wearing all day, just to do that. And it's not to, it can sound dystopian of like people sitting in headsets all day, but really what it's offering is like what I was talking about before, is the ability to work with people in a more intuitive way. And I think that's where I hope this technology is going. If it doesn't make your life more pleasant in some way, why would you change to it, right? Like we have a lot of laptops and Zoom calls and all of these things. So I think that a kind of a fully immersive work environment is sort of like a way of saying, I'm going to commute, and you just go gunk, and now you're at the office, and it could be whatever you want it to be. And the ability to have spontaneous conversations with people and being able to kind of have creative collaborative sessions in ways that feel more natural is where I hope the technology ends up.
And then I have a question for both of you. I'm going to go even farther into the future, maybe not that far time-wise, but at least farther technologically. Other than some of the current constraints we know of, things like speed of light and whatnot, could remote access integration be used like interplanetary systems? Do you think troubleshooting a problem on Mars from Earth? I'm reminded. When I ask the question, I'm thinking back to the movie The Martian, where the guy's like, he can only ask yes/no questions, and we can only answer that, and then and we can trip time is 20 minutes, and this kind of thing. This is going to take forever. But could it be used, do you think, if we could figure out how to get data there more quickly?
Yeah, the speed of light's a pesky problem. I wouldn't want to speculate on some sort of quantum entanglement communicator or something. That's like way out there. But yeah, I think the ability to work with people that are far away from us is what we always want. We want to feel connected to each other. I think that's a really instinctual part of like being a person. So I love that idea. I think what could be more like a way of thinking about that is just that there'll be kind of like predictive systems. So like as one side of the conversation is trying to like figure out how to talk to the other, there'll be essentially assistants involved, and so the communication may be sort of summarized between both parties, and maybe we won't feel so isolated that way by just being able to have conversations more natively, like in each location, and the conversations are summarized as over time, and we can sort of collaboratively work with, I mean, what essentially I'm talking about AIs being like these sort of interfaces that kind of allow us to talk between like Earth and Mars. And but who knows, like that you get way out there.
Mm-hmm. The quantum entanglement was a great angle there, because that's probably what I'm guessing somebody's probably working on that right now. Has to be quantum entanglement computing or something for communication.
Yeah, Don, we were talking about the fast communicating Mars to Earth, and
yeah,
you know,
that's brilliant stuff.
Speed of light's
Brilliant
a pesky.
stuff.
It is.
Yeah,
you have to do something like the Ingenuity helicopter, where they would tell it where to go, but it would have to work out how to get there itself, and it flew using a camera pointing at the ground basically, and trying to figure out where's a good place to land, and where am I not trying to navigate. Worked well for a while.
Yeah, actually, really.
Yeah, let's do some closing thoughts. Alex, I'm going to start with you. You've worked at the intersection of sort of creativity and technology, I think is a good way to put it for your background. What advice would you give to businesses that are exploring immersive technologies and remote access together to try and stay ahead of the curve?
I think that one of the biggest hurdles I've seen over and over again is fostering innovation as a culture. So you could hire a group like Invisible Thread to come in and solve your problem, build whatever technology you want to build. But what really makes the biggest difference is having an internal group of people that are really engaged with it and curious about it and motivated to develop it. And I think there's often a kind of a tug of war in businesses where they're trying to make things reproducible and predictable. And that kind of creates these entrenched ways of working that are hard to change and hard to like bring in new ideas. So I would encourage businesses to think about ways they can sort of shake the snow globe and just get new ideas in. Maybe it's a percentage of people's time they get to kind of try something new and build prototypes, that kind of thing. That's really where the innovation comes from, is people having the freedom and the autonomy to implement their own creative like innovations in what they do in the day.
Excellent. And Dom, we're on episode 6 together. This is the episode that concludes this series. What advice would you give to organizations that are looking to future-proof their products with remote access integration?
Yeah, I think even if you're trying to build it into a Mars rover or an AI kill switch, I think just have a listen to these podcasts and read the ebooks and look at our white papers and come and talk to us, and yeah, we'll help you get integrated.
So I expect between the two of you that we'll have the Mars rover problem fixed by next year. So make sure you have that done.
We're working on quantum entanglement. It'll be
thank you. Appreciate that. For those of you listening, if you'd like more information on RealVNC and their OEM program, you can visit realvnc.com/OEM. And remember, as I mentioned, this is the final episode in this 6-part series. So be on the lookout for all of the podcast episodes in this series on your choice of podcast platform. Thanks a lot for listening. We'll catch you all in the next one.